It's time for Trench Talk, where Joe Rogan meets underground metal and heavy music. I'm your host, Flight of Icarus from metaltrenches.com. As always, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, follow us on social media, sign up for the mailing list, and consider supporting us on Patreon or Subscribestar. Links to all that down in the description. All right, you want to start by introducing yourself and your band?
My name is Matt Owen, and I play guitar for the band Rank and Vile.
Cool. And how would you describe the sound of your band?
Everybody always asks me that question, and I still don't know the proper way to answer it, but I would say we're down-tempo death grind.
Okay. And something I've been liking asking bands a lot lately is there's so much music now, and it's so easy to get your shit out there. So what is it that you feel like your band can offer that maybe some other bands in that genre don't quite have?
It kind of harkens back to the first question where it's really hard to describe our music. I feel like we're very genre bending. Like, you can listen to the opening track of our songs and you might think that we're a doom metal band. Or you can listen to the title track and it's like, wow, this is a grindcore band. And then some of the riffs will be like just straight Slayer riffs. And I think that's what sets us apart. And you're totally right. It's a big pond out there, and you have to be a fish that stands out because it's a watered down metal in general is just watered down right now with everything. Everybody has the ability to put themselves out there, so you have to stand out.
Yeah. And I guess this goes into what we were just talking about before we started, having a lot of respect for bands that do weird stuff. We were talking about the new Car Bomb, and do you see yourself kind of interested in doing weird experimental stuff, or are you more content to just sort of stick to the blueprint, so to speak?
So in all the previous bands I've ever been in, I've always tried to push the envelope, and I found that led to extremely long songwriting processes and people disagreeing on, what sounds good in what part of the song, how to transition from this to that. And I actually started this band, well, we all did, but, with the intention of just being more bare bones and riff driven and groove driven, to just, catch you with really heavy music.
I can respect that. Sometimes you just need that sledgehammer to the face.
Exactly.
There's always room for that. Speaking of the band starting, so you all are pretty new, right? I read in the press release, you all just started last year, and it's been a pretty quick turnaround. So could you talk a little bit about what the formation was like and all of that?
So we started in summer of last year, and it was, just such a loose start. I reached out to musicians that were in bands that I played with in the local area that we're in. And we would play shows together, and, just like this community camaraderie we had over a few years. And then we just all stopped playing music. And I was like, well, I really like that drummer. I like that bass player. That vocalist was sick. And I just kind of reached out to all these people and asked them if they were interested in starting this style of music of band. And we started in the summer of last year and then released our first EP October of last year and played our first show. And then we've tried to have the pedal to the metal ever since. I think it's a time where you need to keep your audience engaged, which is why we're churning out things so quickly and have the intention to in the future.
Have you played a lot of shows so far, or?
Yeah, I would say we play 2 a month on average in the region. We're from Portland, so up in the Pacific Northwest, we, have intentions on playing in Seattle and up there, but the furthest north we've gone is Olympia, and we haven't really traveled too far south yet, but are willing to, and, just kind of get a local fan base going before we, have any further plans on live performances.
Fair enough. Have you had any favorite show moments yet so far? Favorite venues you've played?
My favorite venue is actually in Kelso, Washington, and it's called Erebus, and we're doing our album release show on October 18th of 2019 there. And we picked it because it's our favorite venue. I mean, you walk in this place and it's just like a shrine to everything that's cool for metalheads. Like, you have horror movie posters, you have like a giant picture of Ozzy Osbourne taking a shit next to the bathrooms. You know, you just have like all of these cool things that people that lean towards the dark side of life enjoy. And the owners there are great. The sound's always great and the crowd's always great.
Are you a big horror movie fan? I feel like that seeps into kind of the music and the artwork to an extent.
Most definitely. And when we started playing, horror was like a real driving force of our lyric writing. And it's still present somewhat, but we even pay homage to that in the opening track of the album with a clip from Hellraiser in there. I'm a huge horror fan and always will be.
Is Hellraiser your favorite, or what would you say are like your top three?
Top three. Hellraiser is in the top three, and I don't know if it's 2 or 3. Number 1 is Exorcist, and the only reason it is because it was the first movie that I lost sleep over. Like, I stayed up all night after watching that when I was 10 years old, and it absolutely terrified me. And then Hellraiser is in the 2 or 3, and then Sleepaway Camp is in 2 or 3. I don't really quite know where to put those yet.
An interesting choice for that last one. Yeah. Any particular reason for that?
I was a diehard CKY fan when I was a child. Yeah. I was obsessed with that band and all those like Jackass movies and the CKY 2K movies and all that stuff.
I used to religiously watch Viva La Bam in college.
So you know where I'm coming from. And those guys' music were plastered everywhere. And I'm from a small town, so like when I heard something like that wasn't on the local radio station or anything like that, and not on any of the, places on the internet I was scouring at the time, it really grabbed me. And then they used an image of Sleepaway Camp for their first EP, which was Disengage the Simulator. And I think it's like a mix of that band and like the time in my life watching that movie and how like weird it was when I was a teenager to like see this killer that you don't know who it is, and it's like one of the first movies where the killer's behind the camera and you see the knife stabbing into people, and I thought that was really cool. But I would mainly attribute it to the band CKY.
That's interesting. Definitely has a shocking ending.
Yes.
That it's famous for, that image. I'm a Shining fan myself. I'm a big Kubrick fan though, but yeah. I love those like kind of suspenseful movies.
It's all wilted away, but I'm wearing.
You can't see it, but he's got it on his hat right now. The "Here's Johnny" moment. Excellent.
Yeah, I love that movie too. I have a Shining tattoo, even the axe and the.
With the carpet design, that's awesome.
So I mean, it's up there as well. Horror's just, it's so broad and it's so like diverse and enthralling. I just love a good horror movie.
What are your thoughts on horror right now? Because I feel like, speaking of music and metal being watered down, horror has like become mainstream. So now, as tends to happen, you've got just like every month your new big blockbuster horror movie, and some of them are good, but there's also a lot of crap now. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I've always been of the opinion that directors and movies that use the jump scares to get people is just such a cheap way to get thrills. So like any trailer that I see that has like a screeching violin and, some little kid walking upside down or something like that, I just completely shut it off from like further investigating it. And it just seems like that's what most horror movies are. But then you get a director like Ari Aster come into the scene that just...
He did Hereditary? Yeah.
Somar. And those two movies have just redefined horror for me. Like, I went and saw Midsommar twice in the theaters because it was just so different than what I'm used to seeing in horror movies. It's
like a daylight horror too, as they call it. Like that makes it extra tough sometimes, I think, when you can pull off that eeriness when it's the polar opposite of like 30 Days of Night, where literally it's dark the whole time. Now it's daytime all the time, but you still have to ramp up that feeling of uneasiness. And I like what you said too. I feel the same way about jump scares, and I always say a jump scare is not really, you're not scared, you're startled. Whereas fear to me is what you're describing, what the types of movies he makes, and just that feeling of unease, which is why I love The Shining. It's just like constant tension and anxiety. And to me, that's like true fear. And if you can conjure that, that takes a lot more effort than anyone can just play a loud noise. And like somebody could come through the door right now and just slam the door real hard. You get the same response, and it's fucking stupid.
I couldn't agree more with you, because I just want like to be disturbed. I don't want to be scared. And that's where it comes from. Like, that's where my drive for horror movies and my love for them comes from.
Were there any other recent horror movies that you really enjoyed?
I actually really liked the new Halloween movie, the sequel, remake, whatever you want to call it. I thought that was very well done.
Where the podcasters get killed, of course, too. So I gotta watch out. No, yeah, it was pretty good. I was pleasantly surprised. It was funny how divisive it was, though, because my friend's a huge horror buff, and he walked out of it. He said he got about 20 minutes in, and they just left. Like, they couldn't stand it. But I was like, dude, I really liked it. Like, it wasn't amazing. It wasn't one of my favorite movies of the year, but I really enjoyed it.
No, like, I can see how it could be bastardized in a fan of the original movie. I like the original Halloween movie, but it's not, in my top 10 or anything. It's a great movie, genre-defining, slasher flick. But it never has been my favorite. And so I went into the movie probably with a different set of eyes than your friends did that walked out. And I can understand. I mean, I hate it when people bastardize the things I like.
Yeah, fair enough. I can relate to that. So let's move to the album. So I'm curious to hear, so horror's in there. What other inspirations do you have for Redistribution of Flesh? That's harder to say for me than it should be. I like that title too, by the way.
Thank you. And it really comes from our beliefs. I don't want to use the word politically, but I guess there's really no other way to say it. The title track is all about wealth inequality and how it's basically a world where poor people are forced to work hard, and then when they die, they're put in a giant meat grinder so the company can sell their meat, kind of like the Soylent Green thing.
I was thinking the same thing.
But in reality, it's like a hellish landscape that we live in right now. Workers are being treated very unpoorly, and wealth inequality is pretty insane in this country. And it's a big problem that we felt like, even though our voice isn't very big, that we had a voice that needed to be used. And so we do have multiple instances of songs that are politically aligned, I guess you could, for lack of a better term.
I like your take on it, though, because I really hate not always. I have some kind of like guilty pleasure albums I've talked about that are like super in your face political, and they don't even align with my ideology, but it's like the music's so good that I just don't care. But what I prefer is kind of what it seems like you're doing is you can kind of take it or leave it. You can kind of take the songs at face value just for like the raw kind of more just straight sort of horror, gore kind of way of looking at it, or you can like delve into, it's like a double meaning kind of thing. I don't know if that was the intention or not.
It most definitely is. And even on one of our songs, it's called Killdozer. It's a straight story of a guy in Colorado that went crazy and went on a rampage with a bulldozer. But then like, the lyrics paint the picture of like what was going through his head and, mental instability. And, it just touches on that kind of stuff going on in the country. But then we have, the single Grey Goo is about global warming. And in this instance, micro robots are supposed to fix global warming, but instead they eat all living existence. So I like the fact that we're taking a stance, but in a humorous way. And in all seriousness, it's meant to be taken seriously, but at the level we're bringing it, it just makes it easier to be taken seriously. I feel
it kind of makes me think of like the preacher versus the court jester. Like nobody ever likes being like preached at, and I feel like that's, to me, that is counterintuitive in metal to take that stance, because metal is formed out of the fact that it was a bunch of people that were tired of being preached at and decided, fuck you, we're just going to do our own thing. Whereas if you go all the way back to like, you know, medieval times, the job of the court jester was to do kind of what you're describing, was to sort of like poke holes in shit that was going on and be the one person who can like say that stuff, but say it in such a way that it's still like making people laugh, and you know, unless they piss off the king and they cut off their head or whatever. But you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I really appreciate that. And I think that takes an extra level of effort, and you're less likely to like scare people away too. Because to me, that like really preachy music that's really in your face, it's like, okay, you're gaining all the fans that already agree with you, and you're pushing away all the fans that maybe you wanted to change their minds, but now you don't have a chance because they're like running for the hills. Whereas if you can have kind of a tongue-in-cheek take on it, then you welcome more people in and give them that opportunity to just sort of think through it themselves. Maybe I'm thinking too much into it.
No, I totally agree with you, and that is the stance that we take on most of the songs. There is one song on the album called OMB, and it opens up with news clips from the Charlottesville you know, all the horrors that happened there, and, you know, the Heather Heyer that got ran over by a car, and it all ends with Donald Trump saying that, you know, there were very fine people on both sides. And that's like the hardest stance that we take, but we feel like it needed to be said, and we're just like pissed off at this shit, and what best way to be, you know, express how pissed we are with like grindcore.
Yeah, that aspect of it definitely makes sense. I hate to keep going back to movies, but I just saw it on Saturday, and it ties into all the themes you're talking about, too. I don't know if you've seen the new Joker movie yet.
I have. I saw it on Friday. I absolutely loved that film. And there's so much controversy swimming around it, and some people don't want to see it because the director said that, you know, cancel culture is the reason why comedy isn't funny. It's your last two movies were The Hangover 2 and 3. That's why your movies aren't funny, you know?
But I do think the outrage is kind of funny, because I feel like these people completely miss the point of the movie. Because it's all about what you're describing. It's about wealth inequality and mental health. And as somebody who works deeply in mental health, like, that really spoke to me. And that message of, no, we're not like raising this guy up and saying you should be like him. We're pointing out how we as a society like create these monsters, because they're not just born that way. Like,
they don't appear out of thin air. They're breeded from an environment of neglect, whether that be at home or under the supervision of the state. Like, this stuff happens all the time, and the movie painted such a good picture of it internally. Yeah. Like, what happens inside people like people that are suffering's, you know, mind, and what can happen as a result of it being ignored. And I absolutely loved it. The
Joaquin Phoenix was so amazing.
Oh, man, he just hit the nail on every single head. The violence wasn't without a purpose. Yeah. You know, that's the biggest beef I hear about people and their problems with the movie, is that, oh, it's too violent. And I think you miss the point, because that violence is there for a reason. It's not just there to be violent. It's
really not either. I can only think of like 3 major scenes where blood is shed. And then the rest of it is that buildup we were talking about. Yeah. Constant tension. I remember I was looking over at my partner while we were watching, and she kept looking over at me, and she was like, I love this, but I can't take it. Like, this is just like, what's going to happen? Like, you knew what was going to happen, but it was just like that build to it was just so intense.
Yeah, that's exactly how we felt when that was the first thing I said when we left the movie. I was like, I love that movie because it made me just so tense the whole time. Like, you were always expecting something to happen, and even when it didn't, you weren't disappointed.
Yeah, it was really good. And, you know, I work with like kids and teens that are like on that road. And so like there were moments in the movie too, like even though like people are probably going to see it because it's they're going to see it for kind of the craziness of it, so to speak. But like for me, it spoke to me on this level of like sadness too, because there's a lot of that in there too. It's just like this guy has just become this like this real victim of his circumstances, and it makes me think of all the kids I work with that like if nothing happens with them now, if something doesn't change, then that's where they're going to be, and it's not going to be because they were just bad kids. It's going to be because nobody gave them what they needed. And I think people still get confused and they're like, oh, so you're making excuses for them? And I'm like, no, like if they do something illegal and they break the law, then by all means they should pay the price for that. But let's rewind. This is why I was talking on the episode with I was talking to Meth, and we were talking about Mindhunter and how much we like that show. And it's kind of that same idea, like what makes a serial killer as opposed to what do they do? It's more so where do they come from?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm still processing a lot of that. First off, I appreciate what you do for, people that are in that situation. I used to work at a inpatient treatment center with younger kids that suffered from drug and alcohol problems, and people of all ages. But when you get to see those problems so up front and know that there's like not a lot whole else you can do except be there for them at that time, it really makes you wonder what their future is going to hold, especially with the direction that this country's going and as far as what we can provide people. And it boils down to healthcare, I guess,
That, and just, I think you're touching on an important piece though that I always tell the counselors I work with, which is that being their piece, like that is the most important thing, because a lot of these kids don't have anyone. And if they just had that someone, and you see stories of this too, like we even talk about this in counseling, like we'll play clips of like those stories from people who came out of terrible circumstances, but they were able to become highly successful. Like I forget who it was, but we all show this clip of this football player who came out of like this horrible community, and his dad was super abusive, mom wasn't around, but because he had like other people in the community that kind of rallied around him, now he's like this NFL star and whatever. And so I really think that's so important. It's just like, instead of shunning those people, as all the sirens go back to, they're going to deal with one of those situations right now. But yeah, instead of shunning those people, like how do you like put your own bias aside? Because we all do it. Like I see like really caring people get really mad at like, oh, this person, they're just terrible, awful people. But I look at it, I'm like, yeah, but what made them that way? Like maybe if everybody wasn't looking at them that way, then that wouldn't have happened and we could have prevented it. We've gone on quite a tangent here, so I wanna get back to the album. What are your favorite moments? I know I'm partial to the kind of vocal and drum break on Cabal Therapy. Yeah, speaking of therapy, what are your favorite moments, and what have been the most like crowd pleasing moments at the shows?
I feel like the best crowd pleaser is the end of the title track, Redistribution of Flesh, where it goes into this break where it's the drum and vocal line where Theo's just saying the words "grind them," and the guitar has this like triplet beat going on that keeps everything in line. That's been my favorite part of the album to play live. My favorite part to listen to is the middle of Killdozer in the middle of Grey Goo, where there's just these relentless, just punishing riffs. I don't know how else to say it. They're just chaotic and, just fun to listen to. Yeah.
What was I gonna say?
Cabal Therapy is actually a magic card. If you guys are,
I do play some Magic the Gathering. I'm not familiar with that card though. Yeah. I wish I had picked up on that.
It's an old school Magic card that makes your opponent discard 2 cards at random.
Nice little reference there.
It's that that one was inspired by the movie The Void, if you've ever seen that.
Yeah, I did see. That was another good, kind of more recent, also low budget, just straight to Netflix, I think, too, right?
I think so, but the practical effects in it are awesome. The story's awesome. And, you know, me and the drummer really like that movie, so he was like, we should make a song about that. And we just kind of borrowed ideas from that and just healthcare in general.
Yeah, that was a good one. I try to support any movie that does more practical effects because you just can't go wrong. And those are the movies that don't age either. I still, like, we went back and watched, we love the first Jurassic Park, and that movie holds up because of all the practical effects. They built a giant fucking T-Rex, and you can tell, like, it looks amazing. Whereas you look at movies from that same time period that were starting with the really chintzy CGI, and they don't hold up. They look awful now. In fact, some of them we watched and we loved them at the time, and we're like, oh my God, this looks terrible.
I was just watching a movie Ghostbusters. Like, I was just watching that the other day, and when the dog's chasing Rick Moranis throughout the park, it's bad. Like, it's hard to watch.
At least that's stop motion, though. I still will take stop motion over CGI most of the time.
Same.
Another thing that stood out to me in your press release was there's a whole paragraph on HM2 pedal. And I don't know if this is easy to put into words, but I'm just curious, like, what is it about that sound that you think is so appealing and drew you to it and just keeps people continuing to use that?
This is my favorite thing to talk about. So what I think is appealing about the sound is that it complements the bass drum more than any other, like, distortion sound, in my opinion, because you have that really trebly chainsaw buzz coming from the guitar, and if it's in like a choppy rhythm and the bass drum is matching that, it just creates this sound that you don't really hear from other distortion types, and that is just super appealing. And then you get the like tremolo picking going along with a blast beat that just you can't get from any other sound, and then like harmonies sound totally different on that pedal, and just like all the tweaks and variants and like clones that I have to make just like this amalgamation of a chainsaw buzz. It's like never ending. And that's why I like it so much, because I'm always getting these new toys to make it sound better and to make it sound different than that band or, you know, anything else you're hearing. And I just am in love with that sound.
Do you have a favorite band that uses it?
Oh, so I have to name all three. Entombed, Rotten Sound, and Black Breath. Those are my three favorite. And Trap Them as a honorable mention.
I fucking love Trap Them.
They're so awesome. One of the best compliments I've ever gotten at a show was a stranger came up to me and he was like, dude, you guys are like Trap Them, but with more blast beats. And I was like, you know, it was one of those moments where you get goosebumps and you're like, oh man, that's the best thing I've ever been told.
That Black Breath record was pretty intense too. That came out a while ago now, I want to say. It's been a while since they put something out.
15 or 16, I believe. 15. So they're not really doing anything anymore. We played with the guitar player in his other band, Theories, not too long ago, back in May. And
I reviewed them. That was some good shit too. I didn't even make that connection.
Yeah. Their live guitar player plays in Theories. He didn't do any writing, but he, you know, is pretty involved in the band. The drummer plays for a local band in Portland called Dead Hunt. And I'm not sure what the other guitar player's doing or the singer's doing, but from what I've gathered is they're still a band, but they just don't do anything. And I'm really hoping that something else comes out of them. It was literally listening to Black Breath that made me want to start a band again.
What bands got you into metal to begin with?
Ooh. I'm going to show my whole poser side right now. And
oh, don't worry. Everyone who comes on here does. It's always the same bands, too. It's the funny thing. And everybody's always like, oh, man, I'm going to lose my street cred. But the reality is, no, you're not.
I think I'm going to lose my street cred when I say the word Godsmack.
I haven't heard that one, actually. I don't know, it's so far away.
No. It was that album. I was like 12 years old, 13 years old. I think the only album I bought before that was like the Men in Black soundtrack or something. But I heard Godsmack on a local radio station and picked up their CD. It was like, oh, I love this. It's so edgy. And then, you just kind of dive down the barrel. That local radio station played a lot of music like that, like System of a Down and Mudvayne. And but then I heard Metallica. Yeah. But after I heard Metallica, it went in the good direction. And then I started realizing how bad those bands were.
Do you remember like what the first sort of extreme metal band you listened to was?
Malevolent Creation. Fine Art of Murder, I believe the album is called. It was that, and it was right around the same time. Malevolent Creation and The Haunted. I don't know.
Ooh, which Haunted album?
Made Me Do It.
Yeah.
So there was a show on Comedy Central called BattleBots, and they had The Haunted's first song off Made Me Do It as their intro music. That's awesome. And I remember hearing that intro music. I was like, whoa, those guitars sound killer. And I just, went on the internet and figured out who that band was and just fell in love with that. And that's what got me into like Swedish death metal, like Entombed and all those bands.
Yeah, Melodeath was definitely a big segue for me. I'm stoked that they got the old vocalists back too, because even though the newer, I forget their names, but the newer guy was fine. But I always just loved those, especially like those first two albums. Like he just has a sound to him that you can't beat.
I've listened to their newer stuff, but every time I feel like listening to The Haunted, I just put on Made Me Do It. It's like, it's just so timeless for me because like I was saying earlier, it was my introduction to like more extreme metal, and it's the perfect metal, and it's just good all around.
Well, going full circle too, I feel like it's a whole spoof on the concept that we were just talking about that's been like age old, where people like to blame violent media of whatever for and that's going on with the Joker controversy stuff, and it just never ends. It's always somebody different who's making the accusations, but it's always the same argument that somehow that metal music or that violent movie or those violent video games, they're the culprit.
Yeah. And then you get into bands like Slayer and things like that where the violence gets a little bit more gnarly. I remember watching videos of people carving Slayer into their arm when I was a teenager on the internet, and Pantera mosh pits and all that stuff, and and the like rise of anti-Satanism in the 90s, early 2000s, where
satanic panic.
Yeah, exactly. Like all of that was going on when I was getting into this stuff, and I'm like, okay, this is where I belong. These are my people.
Absolutely. I guess this is kind of related in a way, but I'm curious, like, what do you think of the Portland scene for metal? Because it's definitely interesting, because I grew up in Chicago, and then I lived in Memphis for a while, and just to me, Portland, or kind of the West Coast in general, the scene is very different. I don't run into a lot of the craziness at shows. People have been pretty cool in person, but I mean, you do hear a lot of like kind of the activism out here against certain bands and stuff, and so that, and then just in general, like your thoughts on being a band in Portland and what you think of the scene.
I feel like we're lucky and cursed at the same time. I feel lucky to be a member of a community where if I want to go to a metal show, I can go to one no matter like what weekend it is. There's always a really talented local band playing. There's always, just something to go see in our community, which is just great. But I feel cursed at the same time because like it's hard to find your spot in all that. It's hard to be noticed amongst all of this amazing talent. And as far as like the activism side of it goes, I feel lucky about that. Being so close to like these Antifa versus Patriot Prayer like riots or protests, I just feel like more connected with humans because I see like it happening all the time, and like giving people, whether they're LGBTQ, people of color, whatever, like giving them a safe place to be pissed off and listen to like heavy music is really awesome for me.
I definitely agree with you, especially, again, being in the field that I'm in. And at the same time, I have a love-hate relationship with it because it still brings me back to the preacher and the idea of somebody telling you, you can't listen to this band, this is not okay, this band can't play a show. Like, I'm always torn on it because I agree with you. Like, I consider metal to be definitely a brotherhood, or, I'm using that as a blanket term. Someone's going to get mad. So like a sisterhood too.
Community.
Yeah, a community.
Yeah, there you go.
Where people can like get along, and yeah, we fuck each other up at shows, but if you fall down, someone's going to pick you up and it's all in good fun. Like, I'm all about that. I don't want assholes at a show starting real trouble, making people feel genuinely uncomfortable because they're harassing them or whatever. Yeah. And then again, at the same time, like, I never like the idea. It kind of reminds me of just like, not only like this, what used to be like the super religious crowd, but even just like groups in high school that would just like bully you for like liking certain things. And so I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I do. I don't necessarily agree 100%. I don't disagree 100%. I believe that we live in a time where you need to pick a side, unfortunately. Like, it sucks to say that, but I can't be, labeled as a Nazi sympathizer anymore. Just because I don't know.
Well, nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that. And I'm trying to find the right words to say, and there's so many people that are better at saying this stuff than I am. But what I'm trying to say is that, like, if you don't pick a side, you're going to be judged either way. And I want to be on the right side of the fence. Not the right side, but I want to be on the morally just side of the fence, and I don't want to be. I don't want people to feel like our shows aren't a safe place to be, or they can't listen to our music because of that. And I don't know. Does any of this make sense?
No, it does. It does. I agree with you, and I also feel like I want it to be more like, instead of us versus them, it's like us against the problem.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And like, I did an interview a couple months ago. So I did a review on kind of a controversial album, and this guy reached out and he was like, hey, can I come on and like talk to you about my personal experience with this? And this was a guy that grew up in a genuinely like racist community. Mm-hmm. Like, he even said, like, even though they were missing the point of the movie entirely, American History X was like their Bible growing up. Mm-hmm. And his dad was super racist, and they had all these super racist terms that they would use, and basically was on the road to becoming a neo-Nazi. But then he got into metal, and he described how being invited into that community and being exposed to a broad variety of people within that context, where, he could go shoulder to shoulder with people of color or people from the LGBTQ community or whatever, and they all just had this shared love of this thing that pulled him out of that. And now, like, he's put that behind him, and he doesn't want that to be a part of his life. And so that's why I like stories like that, where it's like, okay, it brings me back to like the Joker thing again in a way. Like, instead of shunning the person and being like, no, you're uninvited and you're like exiled, where now they're in this like bubble where they just like continue to reproduce the same bad ideas. It's like, no, let's like huddle together and figure out like, how do we sort of rub off on each other and hopefully find the right way together. But maybe we're getting too philosophical here. I don't know.
No, I think these things are important to talk about, and I wish I was better with my words to convey what I'm trying to say. But I agree with you there. Like, if you feel like ostracized by a community, find out why. Figure out what kind of ideals you're holding that might not make you feel welcome at a show. And if it's, because you're a different color skin than somebody, then those aren't the shows you want to be going to in the first place, and tell the community about it. I want everybody to feel welcome at our shows. And I think I'm blessed to be a part of the Portland metal community, because I've never had that experience at a show. Like, our concerts are pretty inviting, and the venues are pretty inviting, and foster that kind of community.
Yeah. And I want to bookend that with the same thing. Like I said, I've never had that personal experience of that craziness happening on a show. I think it does get blown up in the media, just like everything else. You get that one instance of something happening that becomes like the whole story and then stigmatizes the whole area. But genuinely, like, yeah, I've had nothing but good face-to-face experiences with shows and people I've met, and people have just been cool, and it's definitely better than not to say that I didn't like the Memphis scene. It was more so that there really wasn't one. Like, it's just not. I feel like it's growing now, and from what I hear from people touring, it's kind of coming up. But it's just nice to have, like you said, there's a show pretty much every night. If you want to go, you can just head over there. Cheap tickets, cheap beer, have a good time, and everybody gets along.
Yeah. I am grateful that this community in Portland isn't like the horror stories I've heard. I'm just glad to be a part of that and to play shows with other bands that are like that, like-minded.
Yeah. Cool. Where do you see your band sound kind of going moving forward? Do you already have future plans for either big shows, touring, new material?
We have new material written already.
Dang, you guys don't stop.
Oh no, we want to make sure that we keep momentum going. We're going to use this material for a split with a band that will hopefully, agree to do it with us. We just got to find the right band. We've have some in mind and some that have shown interest, and I hope that those work out. As far as touring goes, like, we're all old and have jobs and kids and, all this kind of wonderful stuff that life brings us. It would have to be the right opportunity for us to get out and go on the road. And I've never toured before, and I don't think a lot of us haven't. So, like, the logistics of that are completely unknown. Like, I don't know how to book a tour. But as far as, like, continually making music, like, that's what we're focusing on right now. And like I said earlier, the blend of, like, a political voice with a horror scheme is still where we're going. We're still, like, deciding if that needs to be taken more seriously or not, but I feel like our next thing is going to be all about, like, this healthcare crisis, like the opioid crisis, mental health in this country. People can't afford insulin. Like, it's horrific. And what better way to talk about it than grindcore?
Yeah, absolutely. We got plenty of content around here. We're number one for young homelessness. We got a huge meth problem too, in addition to the opioid thing. Like, it's a mess, and we gotta get together and figure it out.
Yeah. And as somebody who suffered from that opioid crisis personally, like, I was a kid introduced to OxyContin, and then, like, when that wasn't enough, getting involved in, like, harder drugs. It's just like, that's happening to people like me all over, except, they don't have the help that I had when I got clean. And that is terrifying to me, because, like we were talking about earlier, how you have, like, you foster somebody and lift them up and, don't judge them for being an addict or what have you. I had that when I got clean, and now I see the way this country is going, and, it's the whole pull yourself up by your bootstrap mentality. Like, that just doesn't work for a lot of people that are suffering.
Yeah. And also, I feel like people are so easy to jump to quick solutions that aren't really the solution. Like, I see everybody going on board in the other direction for, like, this is a housing crisis. And I'm like, it's not, though. Like, that's an aspect of it, but to me, that's like a minute percentage of the problem. What I'm really seeing is a revolving door of, you've got these stressed out caregivers who aren't capable of caring for their kids. They're traumatizing their kids. Their kids are developing mental health problems. They're running away from home. They're winding up on the streets, and they're getting addicted to these substances. And also, rates of sexual assault and everything in those homeless camps are really high. So they're getting re-traumatized constantly, and there's no support, and they're just getting more and more mentally ill by the minute. And it's like, housing's not going to fix that. Like, that's going to help some people, but ultimately we need to, like, really re-look at, where does the money need to go? How do we look at prevention and all this kind of stuff?
In my experience, if you're surrounded by, help from being in like a homeless position, if you have sources to rely on and are able to get on your feet, then you want to be on your feet. You want to do good. You want to, continue to lead a productive life. It's not like most people just decide to be homeless. It's not how it works. There's something wrong, and that's the root of the problem, in my opinion.
Yeah. And then the addiction just continues to hold them down, because even if they, for a minute, get in that mindset of, yeah, I want to fix this, and I'm going to reach out to do these things, but 5 minutes later they're high again, and it's like all that goes out the window. So, and it really is a brain rewiring thing.
It is.
But yeah.
It is.
Well, cool, man. Any final thoughts on anything? We covered a lot of ground here.
We did. We talked about a lot. I just want to thank my band members and my partner for putting up with me being in a band, and my band members for having such a great work ethic, and anybody that has supported us in any way. Thank you for just listening and helping me just live an awesome metalhead life. I've always wanted to release a record, and now we're finally doing it. I've never had a physical record of my own music, and that's something that I achieved this year. It's because people like our music. So thank you.
Cool, man. And thank you for your time. I really, especially driving out here, we're at the most metal of locations, the Black Rock Coffee House, having this conversation. But it's always cool to do these in person. And I only get to do it ever so often. So it was kind of serendipitous that we just ran into each other at the 2nd Avenue Records, and you were passing out flyers. So yeah, it was cool. Yeah. But yeah, thanks again.
Thank you for having me, man. This was a lot of fun. Yep.
Anytime. And that'll do it for another episode of Trench Talk. Thank you as always for listening. Once more, if you have not already, please do subscribe. And also remember that this podcast is available on multiple platforms. It's on YouTube, iTunes, CastBox, and BitChute. Also follow us on social media, sign up for the email list if you really want to make sure you don't miss anything, because we all know that the algorithms for Facebook and whatnot are kind of garbage, and they're not really good at giving you the stuff that you're looking for. Regardless of what platform you're on to, please do also subscribe to the YouTube channel, because I also post all kinds of videos and other content there, from reviews to retrospectives and things of that nature. And finally, please do consider, if you keep coming back and you really enjoy this as a part of your kind of metal listening experience, then consider going over to our Patreon or Subscribestar and donating to us there. Just $1 a month. Your couch change makes a huge difference, and it helps me cover the overhead costs of hosting the podcast, getting equipment, all that kind of stuff. So I'd be infinitely grateful if you did that. But links for all of that once more down in the description. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.